The sun cracked over the horizon like a soft egg yolk, casting gold across the still waters of Lake Huron as Evelyn Carter stretched her arms overhead, her breath slow and even, her movements deliberate. Her bones were old but her spirit felt ageless. At 94, she greeted the morning like a lifelong friend, not a burden. Behind her, a teenage boy crouched beside a tripod, recording her every motion in silence. The camera clicked softly with each frame as Evelyn moved into warrior pose. "What if your final years turned out to be your most powerful?" the boy whispered to himself, the audio capturing both awe and disbelief. The story of Evelyn Carter had begun to unravel in a way no one could have anticipated, not her neighbors, not her estranged family, not even Evelyn herself. Just last week, she had been alone, doing her usual yoga stretches beside her Labrador, Max, sipping on warm lemon water and journaling before the rest of the world even stirred. And now she was here, being watched by strangers on the internet. "You're going viral, Miss Evelyn," the boy had said, showing her a video on his cracked phone screen. Her face was lit up in pixels, mid-lunge, her white hair pulled into a tight bun, her breath steady. 3 million views, he added, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Evelyn just blinked at the number. She'd never cared much for the digital world. She didn't even own a television. But this was different. She stared at the comments scrolling beneath the video. "She's stronger than my 40-year-old dad." Goals. What's her secret? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? That line had been written by the boy, Miles, the young filmmaker who'd come to do a school project on local legends. He didn't expect to find one. She hadn't expected to become one. Miles had walked up her front porch a week ago, camera hanging from his neck, sneakers muddy, his oversized hoodie pulled over his ears. "Ma'am, do you mind if I ask what you do every morning out here?" he asked, squinting at her through the early morning mist. Evelyn, cautious but intrigued, invited him for tea. 1 hour turned into 4. She told him about the habits she'd created over decades, not to impress anyone but to survive. Wake up before the sun. Move like your life depends on it. Feed your mind before your stomach. Shock your system. And write. Always write. Miles, astonished, filmed it all. He thought he was capturing something beautiful. He didn't know he was igniting a wildfire. That same day, while Evelyn was making her rosemary tea, a letter arrived in her mailbox. At first glance, it looked like junk, heavy cream-colored cardstock with a seal she didn't recognize. She nearly tossed it. But something made her stop. It was addressed by hand, in unmistakably bold, mechanical letters, Evelyn Carter. The return address? Palo Alto, California. The sender? Elon Musk. She held the envelope like it was ticking. Why would one of the world's most powerful men be writing to her, a widow with a cranky hip and a garden full of bell peppers? Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside, a single page. "Dear Ms. Carter," it began. "I recently received a letter from you. I don't often reply to personal messages, but yours stood out. Your thoughts on time, energy, and personal discipline felt like something I needed to hear. In fact, they reminded me of my mother. Would you be open to a visit? I'd like to meet you in person. Respectfully, Elon Musk." She read it again. And again. Then she laughed, alone in her kitchen, the kettle whistling behind her. She laughed until tears formed. Not because she found it funny, but because it felt impossible. She hadn't written to Elon Musk for any reason other than to tell him the truth. A truth she'd carried inside for decades. That aging wasn't something to fear, it was something to prepare for. To train for. She didn't expect a reply. But now, here it was. And everything was changing. That night, Evelyn didn't sleep. She stayed up watching the lake flicker in the moonlight. Her dog curled beside her feet. Her journal open. She wrote one sentence, "Maybe I'm not done yet." The next morning, the boy returned. Miles looked even more stunned than before. "They're talking about you on the news," he said, holding his phone again. "BuzzFeed, CNN, even TikTok. You're trending." Evelyn poured him tea. She moved slowly, carefully, as always. "I'm too old to trend," she said, but smiled softly as she spoke. The storm began then, quietly. It started with a handful of emails. Journalists. Podcasters. One morning talk show invited her to fly out next week. She declined. She didn't care to be gawked at like a circus act. But the letter from Elon, that she couldn't ignore. She reread it every morning for the next 3 days. Finally, she sent her reply. "Mr. Musk," she wrote. "I don't fly anymore. But if you'd like to come see an old woman in her garden, the door is open." She didn't expect a follow-up. But on the 5th morning, a black SUV pulled into her gravel driveway. Miles was there, camera in hand, mouth open in disbelief. 2 men in dark suits stepped out, followed by a tall man with salt and pepper hair and a shy grin. "Miss Carter?" he asked. Evelyn stood from her rocker. Her spine straightened naturally, her eyes squinting in the sunlight. "You're taller than I expected," she said, not missing a beat. Elon laughed. "You're exactly how I imagined," he replied. What followed was stranger than fiction. He stayed for tea. Walked through her garden. Toured her humble lakeside home. They sat by the water for over an hour, no cameras, no press, just 2 people talking about entropy and time and memory. She told him about her 5 habits. He told her about burnout. She gave him a copy of her morning letter from that day. "You'll like this one," she said. "It's about gravity." He smiled. "I'm listening." When he left, he asked for a photo. She agreed, reluctantly. He posted it later that night, captioned, "Met a hero today. Her name is Evelyn. She's 94 and healthier than most people I know. I think we all have something to learn from her." The internet exploded again. And Evelyn, who had lived alone for 30 years without much fuss, found her name trending beside the words longevity, purpose, aging, habits, and grace. She wasn't ready for what came next. The headlines. The drone shots of her home. The endless packages. A letter from Oprah. A box of books from Michelle Obama. But what rattled her most wasn't any of that. It was an envelope that arrived late one evening, addressed in her brother Tommy's handwriting. Tommy, who'd been declared missing in 1953. Her hands went cold. She opened it with a blade. Inside was a faded cassette tape and a single note, "He never forgot you." Evelyn stared out the window. The lake shimmered under the dusk light. She turned the tape over in her hand like a precious fossil. Then she smiled faintly and whispered to the stillness, "Maybe this is just the beginning." And somewhere far away, another video of her yoga routine passed 10 million views. And a comment read, "I've been depressed for 3 years. This gave me hope. I'm going to try one of her habits tomorrow." Evelyn would never read that comment. But it didn't matter. Her morning had already started. And so had something much bigger. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Before the world started paying attention to her sunrise stretches and handwritten letters, Evelyn Carter was just a small barefoot girl chasing lightning bugs through the cornfields of southern Illinois, her world no bigger than the distance between her family's front porch and the edge of the woods behind the barn. She was born in 1931, in the middle of a sweltering summer, to parents who had little but made sure she never felt the weight of that lack. Her father, Harold Carter, was a quiet man with hands like tree bark and a voice that only rose when he was singing hymns at church or calling her in for dinner. Her mother, June, was the heart of the home, a woman who wore her grief and grit as one garment after the other and taught Evelyn how to make sugar last and kindness echo. They lived in a weathered farmhouse with no insulation and a front door that squeaked like a field mouse every time it opened. Evelyn shared a room with her older brother Tommy, who was 6 years her senior and the moon to her stars. He built her wooden toys out of scrap, taught her how to skip rocks and promised her that if she could keep a secret, he'd tell her where fireflies went during the day. She adored him like children adore superheroes, not realizing that her love was planting itself deep in the soil of her future grief. The Carters were simple folks. Harold worked as a mechanic and sometimes took extra shifts at the train yard. June grew vegetables, mended clothes for neighbors, and volunteered at church. Money was tight, but love was not. On Sundays, Evelyn would press wildflowers into her Bible and sit beside her mother humming hymns. She remembers the way the heat would stick to the back of her knees during long sermons, and how her father would slip her peppermint candies to keep her still. In those days, the world felt small and sacred, like it existed only in the distance between her fingertips and the sky. But then came the winter of 1941, and everything changed. Evelyn was 10 when her father enlisted after Pearl Harbor. She didn't understand the weight of war, all she knew was that he packed his boots and kissed her twice on the forehead before disappearing into the cold. Her mother stood still on the porch, holding his scarf like it was his entire body, and Evelyn watched her become a statue of sorrow overnight. Letters arrived every few weeks, folded carefully and smelling like smoke and foreign dust. Her father wrote in all caps, his handwriting a mix of precision and fatigue. He told her to be strong, to look after her mother, and to keep drawing the sun. He always asked if she was still writing stories. She was. Even then, she was telling tales, to her dolls, to the chickens, to anyone who would listen. Her imagination became the blanket she wrapped around herself when the wind howled too loudly through the cracked windows. In 1943, 2 uniformed men showed up at their door with hats in their hands and eyes that couldn't meet June's. Evelyn remembers how her mother didn't scream. She didn't collapse. She just nodded once, turned around, and closed the door gently behind her. That night, Evelyn found her in the pantry, sitting on the floor next to a bag of flour, completely silent. She didn't cry until the morning, and then only into the crook of Evelyn's neck. Harold Carter was gone. Killed in the Pacific. Buried somewhere she'd never see. From that moment on, June became quieter, but also stronger in a way that frightened Evelyn. She never talked about Harold again. She worked harder, rose earlier, and carried the grief like a second skin. Tommy stepped up, barely 15 but already tall and solid. He took odd jobs, fixed neighbors' roofs, and made sure Evelyn had what she needed. But something in him hardened too. He stopped making jokes. He started listening to the radio late at night, alone in the barn. One day, Evelyn asked him if he was going to go to war too. He looked at her for a long time, then ruffled her hair and said, "Not if I can help it, squirt." But in 1950, when he was 24 and she was 19, he enlisted without telling anyone. Evelyn found out when June dropped the breakfast spoon into the sink and whispered, "He's gone." Gone like her father. Gone like her childhood. The last letter she got from Tommy was full of optimism. He'd made friends. He liked the food, surprisingly. He was reading a book on astronomy and wanted to teach her about stars when he came home. And then silence. Weeks. Then months. Then a telegram. Missing in action. Korea. Evelyn stared at the note for hours. June didn't say a word. She didn't cry. She didn't move. Evelyn screamed into a pillow until her throat gave out. For years, she believed he would come back. She'd hear a knock on the door and he'd be there, older, maybe a little thinner, but whole. She believed that until she was nearly 30. It was around that age she began waking up before dawn, unable to sleep. She would lie in bed, the sky still black, the air still, and her heart would thump like it was trying to escape. That's when she started her morning walks. At first, just to calm her mind. Then they became routine. Purposeful. She began moving through the world like her survival depended on discipline, and maybe it did. Her mother passed quietly in 1961, leaving behind a few notebooks, a garden that still bloomed without her, and a daughter who had learned how to bear pain without breaking. Evelyn never married. Not after James. And not after Tommy. Her world grew smaller by choice. But the memories never left. She remembered her father's quiet strength, her mother's silent grief, and her brother's laugh like a song she hadn't heard in decades but still knew the words to. She remembered the day she found Tommy's old pocketknife under the floorboard, and how she held it like a relic from a lost world. Those memories built her. Brick by brick. Habit by habit. Her childhood was not easy. It was not soft. But it was full of lessons she carried like tools, tools she would later use to keep herself healthy, awake, alive. People who saw her now, bending like a reed at 94, often assumed she had some secret sauce, some mystical advantage. But the truth was simpler. She had been training for this her whole life. She had been tested by death, by silence, by abandonment and war. She had made peace with loneliness and learned to be her own anchor. She had found strength in sunrise and forgiveness in motion. She had learned to breathe through pain and to honor the ghosts by living fully. And even now, as the world watched her with fascination and curiosity, Evelyn still woke before the sun, brewed her tea, opened her journal, and wrote a single line, "I am still here." That sentence had changed over the years. Sometimes it was angry. Sometimes soft. Sometimes defiant. But always, always true. And if you'd asked her, sitting on her porch with the lake sighing behind her and Max at her feet, she would tell you that the habits didn't start when she got old. They started the moment she lost everything and realized she had to choose, break, or become unbreakable. She chose the latter. It was 1949 when Evelyn Carter met James Whitmore, and in that moment, she swore the world tilted a little on its axis. She was 18, fresh out of high school with a scholarship to the University of Illinois, majoring in mathematics, a bold move for a girl in that era, especially one who still felt like a child wearing adult shoes. She arrived on campus with a suitcase her mother had sewn from old curtain fabric, 2 dresses, and a brain that ticked like a metronome. Evelyn didn't expect to fall in love. She came for numbers. Numbers didn't lie, didn't vanish in war, didn't write letters and then disappear forever. Numbers were constant, and that was all she wanted after losing her father and brother to the ghosts of battlefields. But then came James, tall, with sandy hair and a voice like old jazz. He was in his second year, an engineering student with a sharp wit and a crooked smile that always made it seem like he was laughing at something private. She first noticed him in the campus library, sitting with a slide rule in one hand and a pencil tucked behind his ear. He looked up, caught her staring, and winked. She rolled her eyes and walked away. He followed her out 10 minutes later and offered her a coffee. "You look like you solve problems faster than the professors," he said. "Buy you a cup and let's talk about quantum mechanics." She almost declined. She didn't have time for distractions. But there was something disarming about the way he said it, not flirtatious, just curious. They spent 2 hours in the campus diner, discussing entropy, the future of computing, and whether or not happiness could be engineered. He asked her if she believed in fate. She said no. "Me either," he said. "But maybe I'll believe in it if I see you again." Evelyn had never been good at believing in things she couldn't measure. But that night, something shifted. James began to show up everywhere, at the library, at lectures, even at the little campus chapel where she sometimes went to sit in silence. He never pushed, never interrupted, just offered a presence that became familiar. Soon they were studying together, walking together, sharing sandwiches on the campus lawn. He told her about his dream to work for General Electric, to help design machines that would change the way Americans lived. She told him about her love for quiet mornings and how she secretly wanted to write a book one day. He listened like every word was a secret code. Over time, she began to trust him with things she'd never said aloud. How she still dreamed of her brother. How some mornings she woke up feeling like the world had forgotten her. James never tried to fix her. He just held the space for her pain, and sometimes, that was enough. By the spring of 1950, they were inseparable. On her 19th birthday, he took her to the edge of campus where the trees bloomed in pink and white. He laid down a blanket, handed her a small velvet box, and said, "I don't want to wait until life makes sense. I want to figure it out with you." Inside the box was a modest gold band, no diamond, just a small engraving inside, "Evermore." She said yes without hesitation. That night, she called her mother, who cried quietly on the other end of the phone and said, "Your father would have liked him." Evelyn felt like she was walking on air. For the first time since she was a little girl, she felt like the world was giving instead of taking. But fate, or whatever name you give to the thing that breaks us, had other plans. James had been accepted into a summer internship program at an aerospace company in California. They decided he would go, and she would stay behind to take summer classes. He left in late May, with promises of letters, phone calls, and a reunion by August. His last words at the train station were, "We're just getting started." Evelyn counted the days like pennies. His letters arrived regularly for a while, funny, detailed, full of plans for the future. They talked about the wedding, the house they'd buy, even the names of their future children. He liked the name Eleanor. She preferred Lila. Then one morning in July, she received a letter not in his handwriting but typed, from his supervisor. There had been a crash. A test plane malfunction. James had been on board as part of the engineering team running diagnostics. No survivors. The world didn't spin that day. It stopped. Evelyn sat on the floor of her dorm room for hours, staring at the letter, rereading each sentence like maybe she'd misinterpreted it, maybe it was all some cruel misprint. But it wasn't. He was gone. Just like that. No goodbye. No body. Just a promise left hanging in the air like smoke. She didn't cry at first. She went to class the next day, even answered a question in differential equations. But that night, in the bathroom stall of the library, she broke. The sound that came out of her was one she didn't recognize, part scream, part sob, part something primal. She stopped writing. She stopped reading. For 2 weeks, she didn't leave her room. She didn't eat. She didn't speak. Her roommate brought her soup she never touched. Letters from her mother went unopened. Everything felt hollow. Eventually, her professor reached out and suggested a leave of absence. She refused. She said she needed to finish what she started. But inside, she was drifting. Her heart had gone quiet. She walked through campus like a ghost. That fall, she returned home for a short visit. Her mother greeted her with eyes that saw through the mask. Over dinner, June simply said, "He was your lighthouse, wasn't he?" Evelyn nodded, unable to speak. "Then like your own," her mother said. "Otherwise you'll never see the shore again." Those words stayed with her. She didn't know how to light anything anymore, but she started trying. Slowly. Quietly. She resumed her classes. She took a part-time job tutoring other students. She wrote one line in her journal each day. Just one. Sometimes it was, "I'm still here." Sometimes, "I miss you." Sometimes nothing more than a date. But over time, those lines grew. And with them, so did her strength. By the time she graduated in 1953, with honors in mathematics, she had learned how to carry James inside her instead of dragging his memory like a weight. He became a whisper, a warmth, a smile she sometimes saw in strangers. She never wore the ring again. But she never let it go either. She kept it in a small tin box with his letters, which she read once a year on his birthday. That pain never disappeared. But it transformed. It became part of the architecture of who she was. A beam, not a crack. Years later, when she was asked if she'd ever loved someone truly, she would simply say, once, and once was enough. And when Miles, the boy who filmed her yoga, asked if she believed in soulmates, she looked at the lake, smiled gently, and said, I believe in one moment that can last a lifetime. James had been her moment. And even decades later, he was still there, in the way she watched the sky, in the way she laughed softly at terrible jokes, in the way she wrote letters to people who'd never write back. Love had taught her how to see beauty in grief. Loss had taught her how to live without expectation. And both had taught her that the heart doesn't heal by forgetting, it heals by remembering with grace. She never married. Not because no one asked, many did. But because none of them were James. And she had made peace with that. She chose solitude, not out of bitterness, but out of reverence. And from that reverence, she built a life of meaning, of discipline, of early mornings and quiet joy. A life that, one day, the world would look at and ask, how? And Evelyn, sitting on her porch with the wind rustling through the trees, would simply whisper, start with heartbreak, and let it teach you everything. By the time Evelyn Carter turned 25, she had already buried two of the three most important men in her life and carried a quiet, dignified grief that most mistook for strength. It wasn't that she didn't feel the loss, it was that she had learned how to live around it. The empty spaces became parts of her landscape, like hollow trees in a dense forest. After graduating with honors in mathematics, Evelyn was offered a position at a government research facility in Washington, D.C., where she was one of only 3 women among more than 80 male analysts. She accepted immediately. She didn't pause to ask whether the job would bring her happiness, only whether it would bring her purpose, and in those days, purpose was enough. She rented a small apartment above a bakery in Georgetown, with wood floors that creaked and a view of the Potomac that glimmered through her bedroom window. Her days were filled with numbers, algorithms, projections, code breaking, and predictive modeling for aerospace operations. Her nights were silent except for the scratching of her pen across the pages of her journal. She still wrote 1 line every day. Sometimes more. But always at least 1. Her routine became her religion. She woke at 5 a.m. Without an alarm, took a cold shower to shock her system into alertness, brewed green tea with lemon, stretched for 15 minutes, and walked to the waterfront before heading to the office. The habit started small but soon became essential. When the world asked too much of her, the morning gave her control. Control was her safety. It was the opposite of grief. At work, she earned respect slowly, often having to outwork, outthink, and outlast her male colleagues. They underestimated her at first, she was young, quiet, and a woman. But they learned quickly that Evelyn didn't miss details. She remembered data like others remembered birthdays. She once corrected a senior engineer in front of the entire department using nothing more than a raised eyebrow and a pencil stroke. By the end of her first year, her reputation was sealed, brilliant, methodical, unshakable. Some called her cold. Others called her a machine. But no one questioned her results. Offers began to come from private firms, universities, and even from NASA, who'd taken notice of her predictive models on satellite trajectories. Evelyn declined all of them. Not because she lacked ambition, but because she had found a quiet rhythm in her life, and she feared disturbing it would unravel everything she had built to keep the chaos away. Her mother visited once, staying for a weekend in the spring of 1957. June had aged rapidly, her hands curled slightly from arthritis, her eyes pale with wear. They sat in Evelyn's kitchen, sipping tea, while the scent of bread from the bakery below filled the apartment. "You always were the strong one," June said, watching her daughter move with quiet confidence. Evelyn smiled but said nothing. That evening, June asked her, carefully, "Have you thought about having a family of your own?" Evelyn looked at her mother and replied, "I did once. But I think I've already loved enough for one lifetime." June didn't press. She only nodded and patted her daughter's hand with a tenderness Evelyn hadn't felt since childhood. When June died 3 years later, Evelyn flew back to Illinois, arranged a modest funeral, and returned to D.C. the next day. She didn't cry at the service. She hadn't cried in years. But that night, she wrote in her journal, "She held me until the end, even when I didn't ask her to." Time passed quickly after that. Evelyn's career accelerated, and by the time she was in her early 40s, she was heading a division focused on computational systems analysis for space shuttle components. The Cold War had made scientists like her indispensable. She traveled more, New York, Denver, even Munich, but never stayed long. She declined all offers of relocation. She didn't want to leave her mornings, her rituals, or her view of the water. Love tried to find her again, once. A colleague named Robert, kind and soft-spoken, 10 years her senior, invited her to dinner after a symposium in Baltimore. She said yes. They talked about literature, the ethics of technology, and shared a bottle of red wine. He held her gaze in a way that made her heart remember. For a few months, they dated quietly, sharing meals, late-night walks, even a weekend trip to a small cabin near Shenandoah. He asked her once if she would ever consider settling down, maybe in the countryside. She told him gently, "I've spent most of my life trying to be okay on my own. I don't know how to undo that." He didn't try to convince her. He only kissed her hand and said, "Then I'm grateful to be part of your orbit, even if it's brief." They parted with kindness. He married someone else years later, and sent her a photo of his newborn son. Evelyn kept it in a drawer for a while, then tucked it between the pages of a book of poetry by Auden. It was never about the absence of love. It was about her unwillingness to risk the calm she had earned. Family became something she observed from the outside, nieces and nephews she saw once a year, friends who sent holiday cards with smiling children. She didn't resent them. But she didn't envy them either. Her life was her own, carefully constructed and fiercely protected. The years continued, each one marked by new achievements at work, new data to analyze, new technologies to adapt to. She was often the only woman in the room, still, even as the 60s and 70s brought slow change. She mentored younger women who entered the field, guiding them with the same precision she brought to her algorithms. Some of them stayed in touch. One wrote her decades later to say, "You made me believe I could belong in a place designed to keep me out." Evelyn kept that note on her refrigerator for 20 years. When she finally retired at 65, she did so quietly. No party. No speech. She simply handed in her badge, walked out of the building, and went home to drink tea and watch the sunrise without having to rush to the office. The next morning, she woke at the same time as always. Her body had been trained. Her mind too. She went through her routine exactly as she had for decades. And when she sat down to write, she wrote, "I have no deadlines now. Only possibilities." Retirement didn't slow her. If anything, it deepened her commitment to living with purpose. She took up watercolor painting, learned basic Mandarin for fun, began volunteering at a local school teaching math to young girls. The school principal once told her, "You're the only tutor who shows up early, every time." She just smiled and said, "It's the only way I know." Over time, her home became her sanctuary. She moved to the lake house in Michigan shortly after turning 70, drawn by its quiet beauty and the way the trees bent in the wind like old women whispering to each other. There, she planted her garden, built a small dock, adopted Max the Labrador, and found a peace that eluded her in the city. And yet, even in that quiet, she never forgot the life she'd chosen, the detour from family, from motherhood, from the traditional roles so many of her peers embraced. She wondered sometimes what kind of mother she might have been, what stories she would have told her children, how it would have felt to hear the word "Mom" directed at her. But when those thoughts came, she let them drift like leaves across the lake, acknowledged, honored, but not clung to. She had made her choice. Not out of fear, but out of clarity. She knew her limits. She knew her needs. She knew that solitude wasn't the same as loneliness, and that a woman who builds a life on her own terms owes no one an apology. The world often asks women to explain themselves. Evelyn never did. She simply lived. And as the sun rose each day over the water, she welcomed it like a quiet friend, knowing she had chosen her path with eyes wide open. Not everyone needs a family to be whole. Some people need silence. Some people need purpose. And some people, like Evelyn Carter, needed mornings. It started with a pencil, a dollar store notebook, and a mind that would not rest. Evelyn was 42, working 12-hour days in a high-pressure division of the aerospace sector, responsible for overseeing systems risk analysis. Her brain was always sprinting. Numbers, variables, outcomes, contingency plans, it never stopped. She could lie in bed, her eyes wide open at midnight, calculating engine failure probabilities or replaying team meetings in her head, unable to let any piece of it go. Sleep came late, and when it did, it arrived in broken, twitching fragments. On one such night, staring at the ceiling fan in the dead of winter, Evelyn sat up, got out of bed, walked barefoot across the freezing kitchen tile, opened a drawer, and pulled out the small blue spiral notebook she kept for grocery lists. She sat at the table, the moonlight soft against the wall, and began writing. Not poetry. Not a letter. Not even full sentences. Just thoughts, one after another. Disconnected. Raw. I think my neck is broken from stress. How long has it been since I laughed? Why do I miss people I never knew? What if I just vanished? She didn't stop for 10 minutes. Then 15. And then finally, after 20 minutes of writing without pause, something shifted. Her heart slowed. Her breath steadied. She put the pencil down and, for the first time in weeks, fell asleep the moment her head touched the pillow. That was the beginning. Not some dramatic epiphany. Just a quiet moment of desperation followed by a surprising sense of peace. The next night, she did it again. This time, she wrote out everything she was afraid of: getting fired, disappointing someone on her team, being forgotten. The fears weren't logical, and she knew it. But putting them on the page stripped them of their power. She started calling it her brain dump. It wasn't journaling in the traditional sense. There was no structure. No gratitude prompts. No quotes from philosophers. Just her, the page, and a promise to be ruthlessly honest. Within a few weeks, she noticed changes. Her mind no longer raced as viciously before bed. She began sleeping through the night more often. Her migraines became less frequent. She started to catch herself in moments of overthinking and mentally say, "Put it on the page later." Eventually, the habit expanded. She bought a sturdier notebook, leather-bound, with thick cream-colored pages, and moved the practice to the early mornings instead of late nights. She realized that starting the day by emptying her mind gave her a kind of freedom nothing else could. She called it, clearing the runway. She imagined her mind as an airstrip, cluttered with debris. Writing was the sweeping. Only after she cleared it could anything worthwhile take off. Some days she filled only a page. Other days she wrote furiously for an hour. There were no rules. Just movement. Emotion to ink. Thought to record. Worry to release. Eventually, patterns began to emerge. She noticed how often her fears circled around the same themes: losing control, being misunderstood, not being enough. She noticed how often her victories went undocumented, overshadowed by anxiety. She began forcing herself to write those down, too. I fixed a calculation error today and saved the team 4 days of work. Someone complimented my dress and it made me feel young. I laughed when the copier jammed for the 5th time. Slowly, those pages became a map of her emotional life, a record of her humanity in a world that often demanded only her intellect. She kept the notebooks lined up on a shelf behind her bed, dating them carefully. By the time she turned 50, there were 11 of them. By 60, nearly 30. She didn't share them. Not with coworkers, not with neighbors, not with old friends who visited from time to time. They weren't secrets, they were sanctuaries. A place to say things she didn't have to explain. Over the years, the habit grew more refined. She began to ask herself specific questions. What am I pretending not to know today? What did I carry that wasn't mine? What hurt and what healed? Some mornings she skipped the questions entirely and wrote out scenes from dreams. Other days she wrote letters to people who had died, her father, her brother, James. She told them what had changed. What had stayed the same. What she still missed. It never failed to move something inside her. When Max entered her life, a rescue Labrador with a limp and gentle eyes, he became a frequent subject. Max just sighed so loud I thought it was human. Max knows when I'm sad before I do. I think Max was meant to find me. In time, she realized this habit wasn't just saving her mind. It was shaping it. Strengthening it. Rewiring the patterns of thought that used to grip her like a vice. Writing gave her the power to observe herself instead of drowning in herself. It gave her perspective. Space. Clarity. In moments of overwhelm, she would pause and think, this will look different on paper, and it always did. When she began posting short videos online, just small glimpses of her morning rituals, Miles, the young documentarian who found her story fascinating, asked her what habit she considered most responsible for her health at 94. She didn't hesitate. Writing, she said. More than stretching, more than walking, more than what I eat. Writing keeps my mind soft. Soft? He asked, surprised. You mean sharp? No, she said. Soft. Sharp cuts. Soft holds. I want my mind to hold what matters, not slice through it. That quote went viral. People expected The Secret to be a supplement or a smoothie. Instead, it was a notebook and a pencil. The comment section flooded with strangers buying journals, committing to daily pages, quoting Evelyn like she was a modern monk. She was amused but hopeful. They think I'm wise, she told Max one morning. I'm just consistent. The notebook became her companion through every season. When her knees began to ache, she wrote about the betrayal of aging. When her eyesight dimmed slightly, she wrote about memory becoming more vivid than the present. When old friends passed, she wrote their names in the margins and told stories only they would understand. She even wrote about writing. The act itself. How some days it felt sacred, and other days like taking out the trash. But she always did it. Because it was never about feeling inspired. It was about staying anchored. Miles asked her once if she worried that someone would read them after she was gone. She shrugged. Let them. They'll find a woman trying her best to stay awake in her own life. That's kind of beautiful, he said. She smiled. It's kind of true. In her will, she asked that the journals be donated to the local women's college with a single note attached, for the girls who think too much and the women who feel too deeply, this is proof you're not alone. The habit endured. Through illness. Through loneliness. Through the coldest winters and the brightest summers. Even on the morning she turned 94, with her hands slightly stiffer and her breathing a little slower, she sat at her kitchen table, opened a fresh notebook, and wrote, still thinking. Still learning. Still me. It wasn't magic. It was muscle memory. A discipline so deeply woven into her being that stopping was never an option. When people asked how she remembered so much, she would laugh. I don't. I record it. And then I visit it. And that was the real secret. Not memory. Not health. But presence. Being present enough to notice your thoughts, your fears, your growth, and gentle enough to write it all down. The habit didn't just save Evelyn's mind. It made her who she was. It was early spring when Evelyn first heard the footsteps on her gravel path, a crisp rhythm that didn't belong to the birds or the wind or Max's lazy stretch across the porch. The sun had only just begun to rise over the lake, sending a pale blush across the water, and Evelyn was in her usual spot, gray wool sweater draped over her shoulders, tea steaming gently on the table beside her, pencil in hand, notebook open to a blank page, brain still clearing out the remnants of sleep. Max raised his head first, ears twitching, but didn't bark. That was Evelyn's first clue. Whoever was coming wasn't a stranger to Max's instincts, and that meant something. She waited, still and calm, until a tall young man emerged from between the pines, camera hanging from his neck like a badge, backpack slung over one shoulder, his face carrying the eager fatigue of someone who traveled too far on too little sleep. He looked like trouble, but the good kind, the kind that doesn't ask for permission, only forgiveness. "Miss Carter," he called out, voice cracking just slightly as if he wasn't used to the silence around him. Evelyn tilted her head and studied him for a beat before answering. "That depends. Are you here to sell something or steal something?" He smiled, teeth bright, posture too confident for a kid who hadn't been invited. "Neither," he said. "I'm here to learn something. Maybe tell a story." Evelyn didn't move. "You're trespassing." "Technically, the mailbox was open," he replied, holding up an envelope with her name printed neatly across the front. "I sent 3 letters. No response. Figured showing up in person might be more persuasive." She sighed, motioned to the second rocking chair across from her, and gestured with her pencil. "Well, you're already here. Sit down before the sun changes its mind." He introduced himself as Miles, a documentarian based out of Portland, working on a series about unconventional lives and aging with intent. He'd read about Evelyn in a local newspaper, just a small article about a retired mathematician who lived alone, walked 3 miles every day, practiced yoga, and hadn't been to a doctor in over 10 years. It was meant as a quirky piece of human interest, but Miles saw something deeper. "They wrote about your habits," he said, setting the camera on the porch floor with gentle reverence, "but not about your mind. That's what I'm after." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "You came all this way to ask questions no one else cares about." "That's exactly why I came," he replied, pulling a small notebook from his backpack. "People underestimate old women. I think that's a mistake." She smirked. "Flattery in the first 5 minutes. You're either very bold or very stupid." "Both," he said cheerfully. "But I mean it. Most people see the surface. I want to know what's underneath. You've lived almost a century alone. You must have seen a lot of the world change and still kept your own rhythm. That fascinates me." Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She watched the water. Max rested his head on her foot. Finally, she asked, "And what would you do with whatever you find here?" "Share it," he said. "Not just online. I want people to see what intention looks like. What aging with self-respect and autonomy looks like. I think we're starving for it." She considered that. Took a sip of tea. The truth was, she'd been approached before. Journalists, wellness bloggers, even a startup founder who wanted to make a productivity app based on her habits. She declined every one of them. But Miles was different. Not just because he was younger or because he had kind eyes. But because he didn't talk to her like a relic. He didn't want to extract her wisdom. He wanted to understand her choices. And that felt rare. 1 hour, she said. That's all you get today. If you waste it, I'll pretend I never saw you. Deal, he grinned, already flipping open his notebook. Over the next 60 minutes, Miles asked questions most people never thought to ask. What time does your mind feel sharpest? What's the first thing you do when you feel sad? Have you ever wanted to disappear? She answered honestly. Without embellishment. Sharpest around 6 a.m., once I've written. When I'm sad, I clean or I walk. Motion heals me. Yes. In 1950. And again in 1972. Miles didn't interrupt. He didn't react performatively. He just listened, nodding occasionally, writing furiously. By the end of the hour, Evelyn surprised herself by feeling lighter. Not because she'd shared some deep trauma or secret. But because someone had finally asked about her interior life without rushing to summarize it. She watched him gather his things and stand. May I come back tomorrow? He asked. You haven't wasted your hour, she replied. So you may. And that was how it began. Every morning, Miles arrived just before sunrise. He brought his camera, a thermos of coffee, and an endless list of questions. Sometimes they filmed, sometimes they didn't. Some mornings they sat in silence, watching the fog lift from the lake. Others, Evelyn walked him through old photo albums, letters, even fragments of her earliest algorithms, long-forgotten scraps of genius she'd never thought anyone would want to see. Over time, she began to look forward to his visits in a way that unsettled her. She didn't do looking forward. Not anymore. She'd trained herself to exist in the moment, in the stillness, away from the noise of expectation. But Miles brought a different kind of noise, a curious, kind-hearted presence that felt less like disruption and more like resonance. He wasn't trying to change her. He was just trying to witness her. On the 12th morning, after a particularly long conversation about grief and time, Miles asked if she believed in legacy. She thought about it. Legacy is a word the living use to justify their ego, she said. But if you mean, do I want to be remembered, I suppose only by the people who needed to know me while I was here. What about people who didn't know they needed you? He asked. She smiled. That's your business. Not mine. By the third week, Miles had enough footage to begin editing. He showed her a short segment one morning, a montage of her rituals, voice-over clips of her words, soft piano in the background. Evelyn watched in silence, eyes steady. When it ended, she said only, "It's strange seeing your life from the outside. Like watching someone wear your coat." "Does it feel true?" he asked. "Almost," she said. "But don't make me look like a saint. I've been angry. I've been selfish. I've said things I regret. Make sure that's in there." He nodded. People need to see the whole story. And he meant it. Because what Miles saw wasn't just a healthy old woman with discipline. He saw a survivor of multiple lifetimes, a woman who had outlived her era without becoming bitter, a woman who turned silence into sanctuary and solitude into strength. He saw resilience not as a loud declaration but a quiet practice, repeated every day. They never called it a friendship, but that's what it became. She fed him soup on cold mornings. He changed her porch light bulb without being asked. Max began waiting for him at the edge of the driveway. The documentary was supposed to be one short film. But Evelyn's life had layers Miles couldn't summarize in 10 minutes. So he kept filming. And she kept showing up, every morning, as she always had. Only now, she wasn't alone. And that was new. Unfamiliar. But not unwelcome. "Why me?" she asked one day. "Why my story?" He looked at her, eyes serious. "Because everyone wants to know how to live well. But most don't know who to ask. And I think you do." She didn't respond immediately. Just looked out at the lake and wrote a line in her notebook. Being seen is a strange kind of gift. Like a mirror that doesn't lie. And when she closed the book, she looked over at Miles and said, "Come back tomorrow. I'm not done yet." Grief didn't arrive like a storm, not at first. It came quietly, in pieces, polite and punctual like a dinner guest who rings the bell exactly on time and takes off their shoes at the door. Evelyn had lived with grief long enough to recognize its many disguises. Sometimes it wore the face of nostalgia, sneaking into her thoughts during sunrise. Sometimes it curled into the corner of her favorite chair, waiting. But it always came back, no matter how many years had passed or how many habits she wrapped around her heart like armor. When her brother Thomas died, she was 22. He was only 19, and the telegram that arrived said, "Training accident," as if 2 words could contain a life. Her mother wept in the kitchen while Evelyn stood in the hallway, arms numb, her throat closing around silence. That grief was loud. Fresh. She remembered the way it took her breath from her chest like someone reaching down her throat with both hands. She didn't cry until 3 weeks later, when she found his compass under her bed. She curled around it like a child. Then there was James. And her mother. And Robert, even though they had drifted apart. Loss took people slowly or suddenly, but it always took. Evelyn had trained herself to mourn without collapsing. She buried her losses like seeds, deep and orderly, and waited for something meaningful to grow. But nothing ever bloomed. Only memories. And those weren't flowers. They were weeds, persistent, wild, beautiful in their own unwanted way. When Max grew old, she felt the approach of grief like a shadow on the edge of a photograph. He moved slower, slept more, followed her less. The vet told her gently that he had maybe a month, maybe 2. She nodded, paid the bill, and walked home through falling leaves, her spine straight but her throat burning. Every morning, she watched him carefully, how he stepped, how he breathed, how his eyes followed her with that quiet, knowing love. She prepared herself, the way she always did. Made lists. Cleaned the guest room in case she needed a place to sleep away from the memories. Told herself she'd survived worse. But it didn't make her any readier. Because grief doesn't wait for readiness. It comes on its own time, like rain that shows up without a forecast. The morning Max didn't get up was a Tuesday. She'd already finished her writing, her stretches, her tea. She called him once, softly. Then again, louder. He didn't move. She knelt beside him and knew before her hand touched his fur. He was still warm, but there was no breath, no twitch, no sleepy grunt. Just stillness. Evelyn didn't cry right away. She sat beside him, one hand on his back, and whispered, "Thank you." Then she called the vet, and they came for his body with soft voices and careful hands. Afterward, she stood in the empty doorway and realized the house had never felt so quiet. The silence wasn't peace, it was absence. That's when the grief returned, not just for Max, but for all of it. For everyone she'd loved and lost, everyone whose voice had once filled a room now empty. She didn't eat that day. Couldn't write. Couldn't sleep. Her routines collapsed, one by one, like dominoes. She found herself talking out loud in the house, not out of habit but desperation. "You should be here. This feels too big. Where did everybody go?" The next morning, Miles knocked. She didn't answer. He came back later with flowers and sat on the porch for an hour, waiting. Still, she didn't open the door. He came back again the next day. And the day after that. Finally, on the 5th day, she opened the door just wide enough for her voice to slip through. "I can't film this week." He nodded. "Okay. Or talk." "Okay. I just can't. I'll be out here when you're ready." And he was. Every day. Reading, writing, sometimes just staring out over the lake like he'd learned that waiting was a form of respect. On the 7th day, Evelyn stepped out and handed him a page from her notebook. It read, "Grief has a schedule I can't control. It shows up when it wants. It rearranges the furniture of your soul. It doesn't care about logic or age or how many times you've been through it before. Each time, it feels new. And each time, you wonder if this will be the one that breaks you. Miles read it silently and didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, "Can I read this in the film?" She shook her head. "Not yet. Maybe not ever." "Okay," he said. That was enough. She wasn't ready to be wise again. She wasn't ready to inspire. She just needed to be broken, and to be allowed to be broken without performance. So she took her time. A week. Then 2. Then one morning, she picked up her notebook again and wrote, "The grief isn't gone. But it's softer now. Like a tide instead of a storm." She brewed tea. Stepped outside. The sun was rising. And for the first time in days, the beauty didn't feel like an insult. It felt like permission. She walked to the dock. Sat at the edge. Miles, watching from the porch, didn't follow. He just waited. She returned 30 minutes later and said, "You can film again tomorrow. But only in the mornings. Afternoons still belong to sadness." He nodded, smiling. "That's a fair schedule." What surprised Evelyn most about grief at 94 was not that it still hurt, it was that it still taught. She thought she'd learned all its lessons, but this time, it showed her something new. Grief doesn't shrink as you age. It expands to fit the size of the love that created it. Max had been just a dog, some might say. But he had been her companion for 13 years, her routine's anchor, her silent witness. And now, every habit she'd formed with him, feeding, walking, brushing, talking, echoed without him. The emptiness wasn't metaphorical. It was physical. A space beside her that remained unfilled. And yet, slowly, gently, she began to reclaim her rhythm. Not as an act of resistance, but as an act of recovery. She wrote again. She walked alone. She even laughed once at an old joke she remembered from a forgotten friend. She allowed herself to feel joy without guilt. That was the hardest part, realizing that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without drowning. One morning, weeks later, she wrote a final letter to Max. She thanked him for every morning he'd stayed close, every night he'd laid his head across her feet, every look that said, "You're not alone." She folded the letter and placed it beneath a rock near his favorite spot by the garden. She didn't need to bury it. She just needed to place it. To release it. And when she stood up, her back ached and her knees protested, but her heart felt like it belonged to her again. Miles noticed the change. She smiled more. Talked longer. Even teased him about his coffee being too weak. One morning he said, "You seem lighter." She looked at him and replied, "Grief left the door open when it left. I'm still deciding who to invite in." He understood. Because that's the thing about grief, it doesn't leave you empty. It leaves you rearranged. And Evelyn, steady as ever, was learning to live in her new shape. It was buried under a stack of old tax receipts, behind a thick brown envelope marked, "Medical Records 1989, inside a drawer she hadn't opened in at least a decade. The letter was folded twice, the edges yellowed slightly with time, her own handwriting still crisp and deliberate. She hadn't meant to find it. She was looking for Max's vaccination paperwork, thinking she might put something together for the little memorial Miles suggested. But once her fingers brushed that paper, once she saw the unmistakable curve of her own R's and the slanted way she wrote capital L's, everything else around her fell away. She sat down on the floor, the file cabinet still open, light from the window cutting across her knees, and slowly unfolded the page. James, it began. Just his name. No date. No return address. Just the beginning of a truth she had once planned to send and then didn't. Her eyes traced the words slowly, each sentence like a breadcrumb leading back to a version of herself she almost forgot existed. "I've rewritten this letter 3 times. The first one was angry. The second one was too polite. This one is just honest. I'm still angry, but I'm also tired. I miss you. Not the you from the end, bitter and distant and too proud to say what you needed. I miss the you from the summer we camped in Oregon and shared that terrible instant coffee while it rained for 3 days. I miss the you that held my hand under the table during that awful dinner with my mother. I miss the way you made me feel seen. You were the first man who ever really saw me. And that's why this hurts so much. You stopped looking. Or maybe I disappeared. I've asked myself 100 times if I did something wrong. If I could have changed the outcome. But maybe it was always going to end the way it did. Maybe we were always too much alike. Too stubborn. Too full of sharp edges. I just wish we tried harder. Or softer. Or sooner. I'm not writing to blame you. I'm writing to forgive you. And maybe to forgive myself, too. For staying too long. For leaving too late. For not sending this letter when I should have. I hope you're okay. I hope you still make terrible coffee and tell stories with too much detail. I hope someone makes you laugh so hard you forget to be sad. I hope you think of me sometimes, not with regret but with warmth. We were something. Even if it didn't last. She stared at the signature. Just her first name. No flourish. No closure. The ink was slightly faded, but it still held weight. She pressed the letter against her chest, eyes shut. James had died in 2003. They hadn't spoken since 1998. Not after the final phone call, the one where he accused her of giving up, and she said, "No, James. I just stopped waiting for you to show up." She remembered slamming the receiver down and then sobbing against the kitchen counter, the silence that followed so vast she could almost hear it breathing. This letter had been her attempt at a bridge. But somewhere along the way, she lost the nerve to send it. Or maybe she convinced herself it was too late. Now, over 2 decades later, it was like receiving a message from her younger self, one she didn't know she needed. She didn't cry. Not right away. Instead, she placed the letter on the table beside her and went to the kitchen. She made tea. Let the water boil too long. Forgot to set the timer. But it didn't matter. She sat in her chair, the steam curling upward, and read the letter again, slower this time, absorbing every word like medicine. That afternoon, when Miles arrived, she handed him the page without a word. He read it, lips pressed into a tight line, and then looked up. "Did you ever send this?" She shook her head. "I found it today." He looked down again, reread the last few lines, and then asked softly, "Can I film you reading it?" "No," she said quickly. Then paused. "But I'll let you record the audio. Just my voice. No video." "Not yet." They set up in her writing room, curtains drawn, mic clipped to the edge of the desk. She read slowly, clearly, no dramatic inflection. Just her voice, aged but steady, moving through the words as if she were sending them now, into the air, into the world, into whatever space James might still occupy in the unseen places. When she finished, she sat in silence for a moment before saying, "I thought writing it was closure. But maybe it was a beginning I never allowed myself." Miles stopped the recording. "It's beautiful," he said. "It's real," she replied. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her mind wandered through time, touching memories like leaves in the dark. She remembered the first time she met James, how he'd smiled like he knew something she didn't, how he challenged every one of her theories just to see her defend them, how he kissed her like he had all the time in the world. They were fire and friction. Passion and delay. Too many words, not enough understanding. But they had loved. Deeply. Messily. Truly. She had boxed that part of her life away, filed it under, too complicated, and moved on. Or so she thought. The next morning, she opened a new notebook. Not her usual writing one. This one had a red cover, still blank. She titled the first page, "Letters I Never Sent." And then she began to write. Not just to James. To her father. Her mother. Her younger self at 25. Her future self at 95. To the women she'd mentored but never told how much they meant to her. To the friends she lost touch with after a bitter argument in 1983. The words flowed easily. Not like confessions. Like offerings. Like releasing weight she didn't know she still carried. Miles came by, saw the new notebook, asked what it was. "Unfinished conversations," she said. Finally being finished. He didn't ask to see inside. He just said, "That's a good title." That afternoon, he edited the audio recording. He added gentle strings, soft enough not to distract, just enough to hold the emotion. When he played it for Evelyn the next day, she closed her eyes and listened to her own voice echo back to her across time. When it ended, she said simply, "Let people hear it. Maybe it'll remind them it's never too late to speak." The segment aired a week later. And the comments poured in. Thousands. "I wrote a letter to my dad today. I haven't spoken to my sister in 8 years, but I'm calling her tonight. This broke me open in the best way." Evelyn didn't read all of them. But the ones she did made her feel less alone. Not in her age. In her ache. In the long, winding trail of words left unsaid that everyone seemed to carry. One morning, she stood by the lake, the red notebook in her hand, and whispered, "Thank you, James. For the lesson. For the hurt. For the love." She didn't need a response. She already had one. In the letter she forgot to send. And in the woman she had become since not sending it. That morning began like any other, with the faint glow of dawn slipping through the curtains and the familiar creak of the old wooden floor beneath Evelyn's slippers. She moved through her routine with practiced ease, stretching, sipping tea, scanning the morning headlines on her tablet, but something felt different. Not alarming, not painful, just lighter. She paused at the window and noticed the way the garden had burst into early blooms overnight, as if the world was trying to remind her that even after winter, life found a way. The air smelled fresher, the sky a softer blue, and for the first time in weeks, her chest didn't ache quite so much. After breakfast, she decided to take her usual walk down to the lake, the path lined with oak and maple trees whose leaves whispered with the wind. Miles called to check in, as he always did, and she told him she was heading out for a bit. "Take your time," he said. "I'll be here when you get back." She smiled. His steady presence had become an anchor during her turbulent days. As she walked, Evelyn's mind drifted back to the letter she found, the one she never sent to James, and how releasing those words had opened something inside her. She realized she'd been holding on, not just to grief but to the stories she'd never finished telling, the chapters she hadn't written, the connections left undone. Near the dock, a soft breeze ruffled her hair, and she sat down on the bench overlooking the water, letting the calm wash over her. Then, something caught her eye, an envelope pinned under a small rock near the garden, the same place where she'd left Max's letter. It was unexpected, out of place. She picked it up carefully, recognizing Miles' neat handwriting on the front, "For when you're ready." Her heart quickened as she broke the seal and unfolded the note inside. It read, "Evelyn, sometimes the hardest part of healing is allowing yourself to believe that change is possible. You've carried so much with grace and courage. If you ever want to explore what comes next, I'm here. No rush, no pressure. Just companionship on your terms." There was no signature, just his name at the bottom, but the message felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. Tears welled up, not from sadness, but from a strange kind of hope. Maybe this morning really was different. The thought of new beginnings at her age was almost laughable once, but now it felt like an invitation. Back inside, she brewed another cup of tea and sat at her writing desk. The red notebook from the previous chapter lay open, filled with unsent letters and thoughts laid bare. But today, she didn't want to write to the past. She wanted to write forward. She penned the words slowly, feeling the ink trace a new path. Today, I choose to be open. To accept help. To trust that life still has surprises for me. When Miles arrived later, she showed him the note she found. He smiled softly, then said, "Only if you want, Evelyn. No matter what." For the first time in a long while, she felt the weight of loneliness lift, not because she was suddenly surrounded by people, but because she allowed herself the possibility of connection again. Over the next weeks, their friendship deepened, a gentle rhythm of shared meals, long conversations, and quiet companionship. Evelyn found herself laughing more, dreaming more, even planning small outings she hadn't dared to consider before. One morning, she confided in Miles about a fear she'd kept hidden for years, that at her age, she was invisible, irrelevant, forgotten. He looked her in the eyes and said, "You're not invisible to me. And I'm sure you're not to the world. Your story matters." His words stayed with her like a warm ember. She realized that her life's next chapter wasn't about holding on or letting go, but about embracing what was still possible. One particularly bright morning, Evelyn decided to visit the town's community center for the first time in years. She had avoided it, associating it with days when she felt isolated and powerless. But that day, she walked through the doors and was greeted with smiles and curious eyes. She joined a writing circle, sharing stories and hearing voices as rich and diverse as her own. It was challenging and invigorating, a reminder that even late in life, new friendships could bloom. The morning that changed everything wasn't marked by a grand event or a dramatic revelation. It was quiet, gradual, like the first rays of sunlight nudging away shadows. Evelyn learned that healing wasn't linear. It was a spiral, sometimes circling back to pain, sometimes rising toward hope. But it always moved forward. And she was moving with it. When she sat down to write her blog that evening, she typed these words: "Change can come at any age. Sometimes it's subtle, a note left on a garden stone, a smile from a friend, a decision to try again. Life isn't finished with us yet. And neither are we with it." That morning had changed everything because Evelyn finally allowed herself to believe that the story was still hers to write. Energy was something Evelyn never took for granted, especially now at 94. Most days, she woke feeling surprisingly vibrant, a sharp contrast to the sluggishness she'd seen in many younger people around town. People often asked her how she did it, what her secret was to maintaining not just health but a spark, a zest that made her mornings feel alive and her afternoons manageable. The truth was, it wasn't one secret, but a blend of habits that formed the backbone of her vitality. It began, she always said, with how she greeted the morning. The first light was sacred, a daily reset, a promise of possibility. Her earliest habit was mindfulness. Before stepping out of bed, she took 5 deep, intentional breaths, focusing on the present, feeling the warmth of the covers, the pulse in her wrist. She believed this practice centered her and slowed down the noise that otherwise could overwhelm her thoughts. After breathing, she reached for a glass of water infused with lemon, a ritual she adopted after reading a study about hydration and metabolism in aging adults. The lemon wasn't just for flavor, it sparked her digestion and helped clear her mind. Next came movement. Not strenuous exercise, but gentle stretching and balance exercises she learned decades ago during physical therapy. She found that by dedicating 15 minutes to these simple motions, she could stave off stiffness and keep her body fluid and responsive. She often said to Miles, "The goal isn't to run marathons at my age, but to move in ways that let me enjoy life on my terms." Food was another cornerstone. Evelyn was intentional about what she ate, favoring fresh vegetables, lean proteins, and whole grains, but more importantly, she ate slowly, savoring each bite. Breakfast was usually oatmeal topped with nuts and a handful of berries, something nutrient-dense and easy on the stomach. She avoided sugar and processed foods, which she said zapped her energy like a bad neighbor. For Evelyn, energy wasn't just physical. It was emotional and mental vitality. She cultivated joy daily by reading something inspiring, writing down 3 things she was grateful for, and connecting with people who lifted her up rather than drained her. That social aspect, she believed, was a secret ingredient many overlooked. Humans were wired for connection, and even at 94, that need hadn't diminished. When she felt tired or down, she called a friend or invited Miles over for tea. Laughter, she said, was better medicine than any supplement. Speaking of supplements, Evelyn was pragmatic. She took a multivitamin and vitamin D, but she resisted the temptation to chase every trendy health fad. Instead, she trusted her body's signals and consulted with her doctor regularly. Rest was essential too. Evelyn allowed herself short naps when needed and ensured she got at least 7 hours of sleep nightly, winding down with herbal tea and soft music rather than screens. She believed sleep repaired both body and mind, a reset button for the soul. One morning, when Miles asked her what she thought was the most important factor, she smiled and said, "It's consistency. Doing a little every day, not pushing too hard, but never giving up on caring for myself." To prove her point, she shared a story from her youth. In her late 20s, after a serious illness, she'd been bedridden for months. It was then she learned the power of small routines, a few stretches, drinking water, reading a page from a book each day. Those tiny acts built a foundation for recovery and resilience. Now, decades later, those same principles guided her mornings. It wasn't glamorous or flashy, but it worked. When Evelyn shared these habits in her blog and interviews, the response was overwhelming. Readers from all age groups thanked her for practical advice grounded in lived experience. Many admitted they felt too overwhelmed by conflicting information and appreciated her calm, clear approach. She often said that health wasn't a race but a lifelong conversation with your body, mind, and heart. She also emphasized the importance of listening, really listening, to what each day required. Some mornings called for more rest, others for extra movement, and some for quiet reflection. That flexibility was key to sustaining energy over time. At community events, Evelyn led gentle morning stretches, encouraging participants to tune into their bodies and honor their limits. Watching them loosen up and smile reminded her how vitality wasn't just about individual habits but about sharing practices that uplifted others. One particular morning, she was asked to speak at the local senior center about maintaining energy with age. Instead of lecturing, she invited attendees to share their own morning routines. The room filled with stories of meditation, prayer, gardening, music, and even morning walks with pets. Evelyn realized that the secret ingredient was deeply personal, it varied but always included intention, connection, and respect for oneself. That night, as she prepared for bed, Evelyn felt a familiar sense of gratitude. Her energy wasn't perfect every day, but it was enough to fuel a life filled with meaning and joy. She knew some days would be harder, but the habits she nurtured gave her a strong foundation to face whatever came next. Before turning off the light, she wrote in her journal, "Energy is a gift, not a guarantee. I cherish it, nurture it, and share it freely. Here's to mornings full of promise and days lived fully." With a final deep breath, she closed her eyes, ready to greet tomorrow with the same care and grace that had kept her going all these years. It was just past noon when the doorbell rang, sharp and sudden, echoing through Evelyn's quiet house. She wasn't expecting anyone, especially not on a Wednesday. She set down her knitting and shuffled slowly to the door, curious but cautious. Opening it revealed a young woman with a bright smile and nervous eyes, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. "Hello, Mrs. Parker. My name's Grace. I'm your granddaughter." Evelyn blinked, her heart skipping a beat. She knew the names of all her neighbors, but Grace was not one of them. A granddaughter? The word felt unfamiliar and oddly exhilarating. The woman held out the flowers again. "I hope I'm not intruding. I just wanted to meet you." Evelyn's mind raced through memories and conversations, trying to place the name or the face. Grace explained gently that she had been adopted as a baby, only recently discovered her biological roots, and traced her family to Evelyn. She'd been nervous about reaching out but felt it was time. The shock was immense. For years, Evelyn had imagined what it would be like to meet someone she never knew, especially family lost to time or circumstance. But never thought it would happen now, at 94. She invited Grace in, and they sat at the kitchen table, the wildflowers bright against the faded tablecloth. Grace talked about her life, the foster homes, the search, the questions she carried. Evelyn listened, absorbing the stories and the emotions. She felt a strange mixture of joy, guilt, and wonder. Joy at the possibility of connection. Guilt for years lost. Wonder at how life unfolded in mysterious ways. Over the next days, Grace returned often. They cooked together, shared old photo albums, and exchanged letters. Evelyn found herself energized by this new relationship, a chapter she hadn't expected but embraced with open arms. Grace brought youthful energy and fresh perspectives, reminding Evelyn that family wasn't just about blood but about choice and love. Evelyn realized that age didn't limit the possibilities for new beginnings. With Grace by her side, she felt her world expand, the past and present weaving together into something beautiful and unexpected. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? After Grace's arrival, Evelyn found herself navigating uncharted emotional waters. At first, the sudden appearance of a granddaughter she never knew existed stirred a cocktail of feelings: excitement, fear, joy, and uncertainty. But beneath it all was a quiet realization: this new bond required vulnerability, something Evelyn had long avoided. Her life had been built on independence and resilience, often masking pain behind smiles and routine. Yet with Grace, she sensed that strength could come not just from holding on, but from opening up. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Grace shared her own struggles with identity and acceptance. Evelyn listened intently, recognizing parts of her younger self reflected in Grace's words. The conversation broke down walls built over decades. Evelyn began to reveal stories she had buried: regrets, hopes, the loneliness of loss. It was uncomfortable but liberating. She learned that vulnerability was not a weakness but a bridge, connecting hearts, healing wounds, and fostering trust. In the days that followed, Evelyn practiced allowing herself to ask for help, express doubts, and accept support. It transformed her relationship with Grace, deepening their connection beyond surface pleasantries into genuine understanding. This openness spilled into other areas of her life too. She reconnected with old friends, sharing not just memories but feelings, strengthening bonds that had waned. Evelyn realized that in her willingness to be seen, she was teaching others to do the same. She often reflected on a line she read once: "Courage isn't the absence of fear, but the triumph over it through honesty." Embracing vulnerability brought new energy, a softer strength that balanced her enduring independence. It allowed her to face aging and mortality with grace, knowing she was not alone. The mornings felt lighter, her heart fuller, and her days richer. This chapter of life was about embracing all parts of herself, the strong and the fragile, the joyful and the sorrowful, and finding peace within that balance. With Grace's presence weaving new colors into her days, Evelyn began to feel a stirring she hadn't experienced in years, a renewed sense of purpose. For so long, her routines had revolved around maintaining health and managing loneliness, but now, the question emerged: what else could her life be about at 94? One afternoon, while tending to her garden, Evelyn had a moment of clarity. The soil beneath her fingers, the vibrant blooms surrounding her, whispered of growth and possibility. She realized that purpose wasn't something fixed or tied to age, it was fluid, evolving with each breath and choice. Inspired, she began exploring ways to share her wisdom and experience beyond her immediate circle. She contacted the local library and offered to host a storytelling group for seniors and young adults alike, believing that stories could bridge generations and heal wounds. The first meeting was modest, with just a handful of attendees, but the energy was palpable. Evelyn's voice, steady and warm, drew listeners into tales of resilience, love, and survival. She found joy in the exchange of stories, each person contributing their own truths. The group grew, becoming a vibrant community where age was not a barrier but a bond. Evelyn also began writing more earnestly, turning her blog into a platform for advocating elder voices and celebrating the richness of life at any age. She wrote about the importance of purpose, connection, and self-care, resonating with readers across the country. Each message she received was a reminder that her experiences mattered and could inspire others. One day, Grace surprised her with an idea, organizing an intergenerational project where seniors and youths collaborated on creative work. Evelyn embraced the concept, seeing it as a way to foster understanding and break down stereotypes. The project flourished, with participants sharing art, music, and stories, discovering common ground in unexpected places. Through these endeavors, Evelyn felt her spirit ignite. She understood that purpose was not a destination but a journey, a series of moments where one chooses to engage, contribute, and love. At 94, she was far from finished. Her days were now filled with meaning and activity, anchored by a mission to connect, uplift, and inspire. She often reflected on a line from a poem she cherished. "We are never too old to set another goal or to dream a new dream." With purpose rediscovered, Evelyn faced the future not with fear, but with hopeful anticipation, ready for whatever came next. Evelyn had come to understand that grand gestures were not always necessary to create meaning or impact. In fact, the small acts of kindness, the everyday decisions to show up fully, were often the true drivers of connection and healing. Her days began to be filled with these quiet moments, watering a neighbor's plants when they were away, leaving encouraging notes at the community center, or simply offering a warm smile to a stranger. One chilly morning, she bundled up and walked to the local cafe where she often met Grace for coffee. On the way, she noticed Mr. Jenkins, an elderly man struggling with his groceries. Without hesitation, she approached and offered help. The relief on his face was immediate, and their brief conversation reminded Evelyn how much simple human contact could brighten a day. That evening, reflecting on these interactions, Evelyn realized how such small acts rippled outward, creating networks of goodwill that sustained a community. She shared this insight in her blog, encouraging readers to embrace the power of everyday kindness. Her message was clear: you don't have to change the world in one moment. Sometimes, just holding the door or lending an ear is enough to make a difference. Grace was inspired too, adopting the habit and introducing Evelyn to her circle of friends, many of whom had been skeptical of the value of small gestures. Together, they initiated a kindness challenge, inviting people of all ages to commit to one intentional act daily. The challenge spread quickly, sparking a wave of generosity that surprised even Evelyn. At a community gathering, a young woman approached her and said, "Your message reminded me that my small actions matter. I've started volunteering at a shelter because of you." These moments filled Evelyn with a quiet pride. She saw firsthand how vulnerability and openness encouraged others to give and receive kindness. The power of small acts wasn't just about the receiver, it transformed the giver as well. Evelyn found joy in this reciprocity, her own heart expanding with every connection. Even during difficult days, when pain or fatigue tried to weigh her down, these small victories lifted her. They were reminders that life's worth was measured not only in achievements but in love shared. Her mornings, once focused solely on self-care, now also included intentions to reach outward, to be present, to listen, to care. She often told Grace, "Never underestimate the power of a smile or a helping hand. Those are the moments that make us human." This philosophy permeated every part of Evelyn's life, from her relationships to her advocacy work. It shaped how she saw aging, not as a decline but as a season rich with opportunities to contribute in meaningful ways. As she prepared for bed one night, she wrote in her journal, "It is the smallest acts that plant the seeds of change. Each one a step toward a kinder, more connected world." In embracing the power of small acts, Evelyn found a source of strength and hope that carried her through challenges and illuminated the path ahead. At 94, Evelyn had lived long enough to know that life was as much about holding on as it was about letting go. But the process of releasing, whether it be pain, regrets, or control, remained one of the hardest lessons she ever faced. It came unexpectedly one morning as she sorted through old boxes in the attic, memories flooding back with each fragile photo and worn letter. The past, she realized, was a weight she'd carried quietly for years. Among the keepsakes was a bundle of letters from her late husband, William, whose sudden death decades ago had left a void both deep and wide. She ran her fingers over the paper, recalling the laughter, the arguments, the dreams they'd shared. The grief was still there, a tender ache. For a moment, Evelyn felt overwhelmed. Why was she holding on so tightly to sorrow? The answer came slowly, because it was part of her story, part of who she was. But clinging to pain meant missing out on the present's gifts. With Grace's gentle encouragement, Evelyn began to confront these feelings openly. They talked late into the night about loss, healing, and the courage it took to move forward without forgetting. Evelyn came to understand that letting go wasn't about erasing memories or love but making space for new joys. She started a ritual. Each week, she would choose one box or drawer, sift through its contents, and decide what to keep and what to release. Some items found new homes with family or friends, others were respectfully recycled. The process was cathartic, a way of honoring the past without being imprisoned by it. This practice spilled into other areas of her life. She re-examined relationships that no longer served her well, learning to say no and protect her energy. She simplified her routines, letting go of unnecessary obligations and focusing on what truly mattered. Through this, Evelyn discovered a profound freedom. She felt lighter, more present, and surprisingly empowered. One afternoon, while watching the sunset from her porch, she reflected on the paradox, that by releasing, she had gained something priceless, a renewed sense of peace. Evelyn shared this insight with her storytelling group, encouraging others to face their own challenges with compassion and patience. Letting go is not giving up, she told them, it's making room for new chapters. This lesson deepened her relationship with Grace, who admired her grandmother's bravery and wisdom. Together, they created a memory book, blending old photographs with new stories and reflections, a living tribute to the past and future. Evelyn knew that some days would still bring sorrow, but she no longer feared them. Instead, she embraced life's ebb and flow with grace, trusting that each release was part of a larger journey toward wholeness. Before sleep, she wrote in her journal, "To let go is to trust life's unfolding, to honor what was, cherish what is, and welcome what will be." With that trust, Evelyn faced tomorrow ready to live fully, free from the burdens she no longer needed to carry. Change had always been a constant in Evelyn's life, but as she reached 94, it took on new meaning. The years had taught her that resisting change only brought frustration, while embracing it with openness allowed growth and unexpected joy. The arrival of Grace was the most profound example. Initially, Evelyn's world had been carefully ordered, a steady rhythm of morning routines, quiet afternoons, and familiar faces. Grace's sudden entrance disrupted that balance, bringing chaos and excitement in equal measure. At first, Evelyn hesitated, unsure how to integrate this vibrant young woman into her long-established life. But gradually, she let go of rigid expectations and allowed space for new experiences. Together, they navigated the unknown, sharing stories, laughter, and even tears. This openness extended beyond family. When the local community center announced renovations that would temporarily close her favorite meeting spots, Evelyn was faced with the challenge of adapting. Instead of resisting, she saw it as an opportunity to explore new venues and meet different people. She organized outings to parks, cafes, and libraries, discovering fresh sources of inspiration. The embrace of change also meant confronting her own aging body with compassion rather than denial. Instead of lamenting limitations, she focused on what she could do: gentle yoga, walks in the garden, and mindful breathing. This shift in perspective brought peace and resilience. Evelyn often recalled a saying she'd heard long ago: "The bamboo that bends is stronger than the oak that resists." Her mornings, once rigidly planned, now included moments of spontaneity, whether a surprise phone call from a friend or an impromptu drive to watch the sunset. This flexibility breathed new life into her days. She shared her evolving mindset with the storytelling group, encouraging others to see change not as a threat but as an invitation. Her message was simple. When we open our arms to change, we open our hearts to possibility. Grace noticed the transformation too, inspired by Evelyn's courage to face uncertainty with grace. Together, they planned future adventures, from visiting new cities to trying out art classes, embracing the unknown as a shared journey. One evening, Evelyn sat by the window, watching the sky shift from dusk to night. She felt gratitude for the many seasons she'd lived and excitement for those still to come. Change was no longer something to fear but a dance to join wholeheartedly. She wrote in her journal, "Life's only constant is change. When we welcome it, we find strength, beauty, and endless horizons." With that thought, Evelyn closed her eyes, ready to greet tomorrow's surprises with an open heart and open arms. As Evelyn's days grew fuller with new experiences and relationships, she discovered a truth that transcended age: the healing power of connection. For decades, she had lived independently, sometimes isolating herself out of habit or pride. Yet now, with Grace and her expanding circle of friends, she understood that human connection was not just a comfort but a vital source of strength. One afternoon, while sitting in the community garden, Evelyn struck up a conversation with a man named Paul, a retired teacher who had recently moved to town. They shared stories of loss and hope, finding common ground despite their different backgrounds. This simple exchange sparked a friendship that quickly deepened. Paul's companionship brought laughter back into Evelyn's life, and together they participated in book clubs, volunteer projects, and local events. Their connection reminded Evelyn that friendships could blossom at any stage of life. Beyond social bonds, Evelyn found healing through intergenerational connections. The storytelling group she led became a vibrant space where people of all ages gathered to share and listen. She saw young adults inspired by the wisdom of elders, while seniors learned new perspectives from younger voices. This dynamic exchange fostered empathy and understanding, bridging gaps that often seemed unbridgeable. Grace's presence amplified this energy, her youthful enthusiasm bringing fresh ideas and bridging generational divides. Evelyn noticed how connection eased loneliness, softened pain, and even improved health. Studies she read confirmed what she experienced firsthand, that meaningful relationships boosted immunity, lowered stress, and enhanced overall well-being. She became an advocate for connection, urging others to nurture their bonds and reach out despite fears or past hurts. One cold winter morning, Evelyn received a call from a neighbor struggling with grief after losing her husband. Without hesitation, Evelyn visited, offering a listening ear and gentle companionship. This act of kindness created a ripple effect. The neighbor found hope and joined Evelyn's storytelling group, eventually forming new friendships herself. These moments reinforced Evelyn's belief that connection was transformative, able to heal wounds invisible to the eye. She often reflected on a quote that resonated deeply: "Connections nourish the soul, they are the threads that weave us into the fabric of life." As she continued her journey, Evelyn prioritized presence, being truly with people, listening without judgment, and sharing openly. This commitment deepened relationships and filled her heart with joy. Even in moments of physical decline or emotional challenge, connection provided a lifeline, a reminder that she was seen, valued, and loved. Evelyn's mornings now included not only self-care but also calls and visits with friends and family, weaving a tapestry of support and love. She often told Grace, "Our lives are richer when we open ourselves to others. Connection is a balm for the soul." With this understanding, Evelyn embraced each new day with gratitude for the relationships that sustained her, knowing that through connection, she was truly alive. Fear had always been a quiet companion in Evelyn's life, sometimes lurking in the shadows, sometimes rising boldly to the surface. At 94, she faced fears not only of illness or loss but also of irrelevance and loneliness. Yet she had come to understand that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite it. One morning, Evelyn received troubling news from her doctor about her heart health. The words felt heavy, stirring a familiar anxiety that threatened to paralyze her. But instead of retreating, she chose to face the reality head-on. She researched treatments, asked questions, and leaned on Grace and her friends for support. This proactive stance transformed fear from a barrier into a motivator. Evelyn also confronted the fear of isolation. Despite her active life, she knew that the risk of loneliness increased with age. Instead of succumbing, she took courageous steps to deepen her connections and create new ones. She attended community meetings, spoke openly about her feelings, and welcomed vulnerability. Each act of bravery, no matter how small, strengthened her resolve. Evelyn recalled moments from her past, like when she had moved to a new city alone decades ago or faced the grief of losing William, and recognized that courage had always been part of her story. This awareness gave her confidence that she could face whatever came next. She began journaling about her fears and victories, turning her reflections into lessons for others. Through her storytelling group, she encouraged members to share their fears openly, creating a safe space for collective courage. Evelyn's journey inspired Grace too, who learned that true bravery meant embracing vulnerability and asking for help. Together, they planned challenges to push their comfort zones, speaking at events, trying new activities, and advocating for elder rights. Evelyn's mornings now included mindfulness practices to manage fear, breathing exercises, meditation, and positive affirmations. She found that these rituals grounded her, allowing courage to emerge naturally. One chilly autumn day, Evelyn stood before a crowd, sharing her story of facing fear with honesty and hope. The applause that followed was more than appreciation, it was a celebration of resilience. She often repeated a mantra she had come to live by: courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. With each new challenge, Evelyn's spirit grew stronger, her light shining brighter. She embraced fear as a teacher and ally, guiding her toward a fuller, richer life. As she closed her journal each night, she wrote, "Fear may visit, but courage will always welcome it with open arms." At 94, Evelyn had come to realize that gratitude was one of the most powerful tools she possessed to maintain her health, happiness, and resilience. It was not just a polite habit but a profound practice that shaped her perspective on life. Each morning, as sunlight filtered softly through the curtains, Evelyn began her day with a ritual of thankfulness. She would list the simple blessings: fresh air, a warm cup of tea, the sound of birds outside her window. This practice grounded her, reminding her that even amid challenges, life offered countless gifts. Gratitude became a lens through which she viewed her experiences, transforming obstacles into opportunities for growth. She found herself appreciating the kindness of strangers, the laughter of grandchildren, and even the lessons embedded in pain. Evelyn shared this practice with Grace, encouraging her to keep a gratitude journal. Together, they would reflect on the day's moments, big and small, cultivating a mindset of abundance rather than scarcity. The storytelling group embraced this too, often ending meetings by sharing things they were grateful for. This simple act created an atmosphere of warmth and connection. Evelyn often recalled how gratitude had helped her through the darkest times, after William's passing, during bouts of illness, and in moments of loneliness. It was gratitude that pulled her forward, offering light when all seemed dim. She understood that gratitude was not about ignoring hardships but about acknowledging them while also recognizing the good that persisted. One afternoon, Evelyn volunteered at a local shelter, witnessing firsthand how gratitude could uplift even those facing great adversity. She listened to stories of survival and hope, inspired by the resilience of others. This reinforced her belief that gratitude was a universal gift, accessible to all regardless of circumstance. In her writing, Evelyn described gratitude as a muscle, one that needed regular exercise to grow stronger. She encouraged readers to start small, to notice the everyday miracles often overlooked. This message resonated widely, drawing responses from people inspired to adopt their own gratitude practices. Evelyn's mornings now included quiet meditation on what she was thankful for, setting a tone of positivity for the day ahead. She found that this habit improved her mood, reduced stress, and even boosted her physical health. Her heart felt lighter, her mind clearer. Grace observed the transformation and often remarked, "Grandma, your gratitude is contagious." Evelyn smiled, knowing that this simple practice had become a cornerstone of her well-being. Before sleep, she would whisper a final thanks for the day's experiences, both joyful and challenging, knowing that gratitude was the gift that kept on giving. She penned these words in her journal: "Gratitude turns what we have into enough, and more. It turns denial into acceptance, chaos into order, confusion into clarity." With gratitude as her guide, Evelyn faced each new day with a peaceful heart and open arms. At 94, Evelyn had discovered that joy didn't always come in grand events or extraordinary achievements. Instead, it lived quietly in the everyday moments: the laughter shared over morning coffee, the warmth of sunlight on her skin, the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. This realization shifted her focus from chasing milestones to savoring the present. She began intentionally seeking out little pleasures throughout her day, cultivating an attitude of mindfulness and appreciation. One crisp morning, Evelyn sat on her porch with Grace, watching the neighborhood come alive. Children played nearby, neighbors greeted each other, and birds sang their morning songs. Evelyn took a deep breath and smiled, feeling a profound sense of contentment. She shared with Grace how these simple moments carried immense beauty and meaning. Grace listened intently, inspired by her grandmother's wisdom. Evelyn's storytelling group also embraced this perspective, sharing daily joys as a way to counterbalance life's challenges. The practice brought lightness and connection, reminding everyone that happiness often hides in plain sight. Evelyn's mornings became a time for noticing, feeling the texture of her teacup, observing the colors of the sky, appreciating the aroma of fresh bread from a nearby bakery. These small acts grounded her, anchoring her in the present and dispelling worries about the past or future. She wrote about this shift in her blog, encouraging readers to slow down and find joy in the ordinary. The response was overwhelming, with many sharing how this approach changed their outlook. Evelyn found that joy and gratitude were intertwined. Gratitude opened her eyes to the good around her, while joy allowed her to fully experience and celebrate it. Even during difficult times, she sought moments of light: a kind word from a friend, the softness of a blanket, a favorite song playing unexpectedly. These sparks of happiness nurtured her spirit and resilience. One afternoon, Evelyn tried painting, an activity she hadn't attempted in decades. The colors on the canvas brought her unexpected delight, and the creative process became a new source of joy. Grace joined her, and their shared laughter filled the room. Evelyn realized that joy was also about connection and self-expression. She often reflected on a quote she loved: "Joy is not in things, it is in us." This truth became a guiding principle as she navigated aging with grace and optimism. Before bedtime, Evelyn would pause to recount the day's joyful moments, letting their warmth lull her to sleep. She penned these thoughts in her journal: "Joy is found not in the distant horizon but in the footsteps we take each day. When we open our hearts, life becomes a celebration." With this outlook, Evelyn faced each new morning ready to discover joy hidden in the simplest places, knowing that happiness was not a destination but a way of being. At 94, Evelyn had learned that forgiveness was not a sign of weakness but a profound source of strength and freedom. Through her long life, she carried wounds, old misunderstandings, betrayals, and regrets that had quietly weighed on her spirit. But the decision to forgive transformed those burdens into lessons of compassion and growth. Forgiveness began as a personal journey. Evelyn remembered a rift with her sister Helen that had lasted decades, a distance born from pride and unresolved pain. After years of silence, Evelyn took a courageous step and reached out with an open heart. Their reunion was tentative but healing. They shared stories, tears, and laughter, rediscovering the bonds that had been stretched but never broken. This act of forgiveness freed Evelyn from a heavy weight she hadn't fully realized she carried. She found peace not only with Helen but within herself. The process inspired Evelyn to reflect on forgiveness more broadly. She came to understand that forgiving others also meant forgiving herself, for mistakes, missed opportunities, and imperfections. This self-compassion brought relief and renewed self-worth. Evelyn shared these insights with Grace, encouraging her to release grudges and practice kindness, even when it was difficult. Grace embraced the lesson, finding it helped her navigate her own relationships with empathy and patience. Evelyn's storytelling group welcomed discussions on forgiveness, creating a safe space for people to explore their wounds and hopes for reconciliation. The power of forgiveness extended beyond personal relationships. Evelyn learned to forgive the passage of time, the losses and changes aging brought, embracing acceptance instead of resistance. She realized that forgiveness was a gift she gave herself, unlocking joy and healing. One quiet afternoon, Evelyn wrote a letter to a friend with whom she'd had a falling out years earlier. The letter was honest, humble, and filled with hope. Though the response was uncertain, the act itself was liberating. Evelyn's health improved as her heart felt lighter, freed from the weight of bitterness. She often reflected on a saying that had come to mean everything: to forgive is to set a prisoner free and discover that prisoner was you. Her mornings included moments of meditation focused on forgiveness, cultivating compassion for herself and others. She found that forgiveness did not erase the past but transformed its meaning, allowing her to live with greater peace. Evelyn's journey was a testament to the strength found in releasing resentment. She faced life with an open heart, ready to embrace love over anger. In her journal, she wrote, "Forgiveness is the key that unlocks the chains of pain, opening the door to freedom and grace." With this wisdom, Evelyn walked forward, lighter and more whole, inspiring those around her to find courage in forgiveness. At 94, Evelyn found a deep sense of fulfillment in giving back to her community, discovering that generosity was as nourishing to the giver as to those who received. Throughout her life, she had experienced both receiving and giving kindness, but it was in her later years that the act of contributing became a source of renewed purpose. Evelyn began volunteering at a local senior center, where she led storytelling sessions and shared life lessons with others. These gatherings brought laughter, tears, and connections, reminding everyone that every life held wisdom worth sharing. The joy in those rooms was palpable, fueling Evelyn's spirit. She also helped organize food drives and community gardens, seeing firsthand how small acts of kindness could ripple out and create meaningful change. Working alongside people of all ages energized her, bridging generational divides and building a shared sense of hope. Grace was inspired by Evelyn's commitment and often joined her in these efforts. Together, they planted flowers, packaged meals, and collected books for children. Evelyn taught Grace that giving was not about grand gestures but consistent, compassionate action. This mindset spread beyond formal volunteering. Evelyn offered her time and attention to neighbors, friends, and even strangers in need, understanding that kindness could be found in everyday moments: a listening ear, a warm meal, a helping hand. These acts enriched her life, reminding her that connection and generosity were deeply intertwined. Evelyn reflected on how giving back had shifted her focus away from worries about aging and health, redirecting energy toward community and service. She found meaning and joy in contributing, knowing that her efforts helped weave a stronger social fabric. Her mornings often began with plans to support someone else, infusing her day with purpose and gratitude. Evelyn shared this philosophy in her writings and talks, encouraging others to find ways to contribute regardless of age or circumstance. The storytelling group embraced this call to action, organizing charity events and outreach programs. Evelyn's message was clear: when we give, we receive. Generosity is a bridge that connects us all. One evening, after a successful fundraiser, Evelyn stood among friends and neighbors, feeling a profound sense of belonging and accomplishment. She understood that giving back was not just about changing the world but also about healing the heart. In her journal, she wrote, "True joy comes not from what we keep, but from what we give away. In giving, we find ourselves." With this conviction, Evelyn continued to live generously, inspiring others to embrace the power of kindness and community. At 94, Evelyn often reflected on the concept of legacy, not just the tangible things she would leave behind, but the deeper imprint of her life's meaning on those she loved and the world around her. The idea of legacy brought both comfort and contemplation. It was a way to connect the past, present, and future in a seamless thread of purpose. Evelyn began to think about the stories, values, and lessons she wanted to pass on. She documented her memories, not just the milestones, but the quiet moments of courage, love, and resilience. Her journal became a treasured vessel, a gift for Grace and generations beyond. This act of storytelling was a way to ensure that her experiences, both joyful and painful, could inspire and guide others. Evelyn also considered how her daily actions contributed to her legacy. The kindness she showed, the community she built, and the courage she demonstrated were living testaments to the life she led. She understood that legacy was less about fame or fortune and more about impact, how she made others feel and what she imparted through her example. Conversations with Grace deepened this understanding. They talked about hopes for the future, the importance of values, and the desire to make the world a kinder place. Grace found strength in her grandmother's wisdom and felt honored to carry forward that legacy. Evelyn's storytelling group embraced these themes, sharing what legacy meant to each member and exploring ways to create meaningful contributions regardless of age. This dialogue fostered a sense of continuity and connection. Evelyn also grappled with the impermanence of life, accepting that her time was limited but believing that meaning transcended mortality. This belief brought peace and motivation to live fully each day. She found solace in nature, observing how seasons changed but the cycle of life continued. Evelyn often quoted a favorite line, "What we leave behind is not what is engraved in stone but what is woven into the lives of others." Her mornings were filled with intentional acts, mentoring, writing letters, and expressing love. Each a stitch in the fabric of her legacy. She recognized that legacy was not fixed but evolving, shaped by the present moment's choices. In quiet moments, Evelyn felt a profound gratitude for the journey and a hopeful anticipation for how her story would live on. She penned in her journal, "Legacy is love made visible. It is the light we kindle in others, guiding them long after we are gone." With this vision, Evelyn embraced her final chapters with grace, purpose, and a heart open to the enduring power of meaning. At 94, Evelyn had come to see that change was one of life's few certainties, and learning to embrace it was essential to her peace and happiness. The passing years had brought countless transitions, losses, new beginnings, shifting relationships, and with each, Evelyn had faced the challenge of letting go. She realized that holding on too tightly to the past only brought pain, while surrendering to change opened the door to growth and freedom. One of the hardest lessons was accepting the gradual decline of her physical strength. Once vibrant and energetic, Evelyn now noticed the limits of her body more acutely. Instead of resisting or denying these changes, she chose to honor her body's needs with compassion and patience. Gentle stretches, slower walks, and moments of rest became acts of kindness toward herself. This shift allowed her to appreciate what her body could still do rather than mourn what was lost. Evelyn also grappled with letting go of certain dreams and plans, accepting that some ambitions might remain unfulfilled. Yet this acceptance brought clarity and a deeper focus on what truly mattered: love, connection, and presence. Conversations with Grace often centered on the themes of impermanence and resilience. Together, they explored ways to adapt and find joy amid uncertainty. Evelyn shared stories of past changes she had weathered, showing that while change could be difficult, it often led to unexpected blessings. The storytelling group found comfort in these discussions, knowing they were not alone in facing life's fluctuations. Evelyn's mornings included mindfulness practices focused on release and acceptance. Through meditation and deep breathing, she learned to observe her fears and attachments without judgment, gently guiding herself toward surrender. This practice created a sense of inner calm and readiness to meet each day as it came. Letting go extended beyond the physical and emotional to the spiritual. Evelyn contemplated mortality with openness, finding peace in the natural cycle of life and death. She often sat in her garden, watching the seasons turn, recognizing that letting go was part of nature's wisdom. Evelyn's journal reflected this evolution. To embrace change is to dance with life's rhythm. In letting go, we find space for new growth and deeper freedom. One poignant moment came when Evelyn donated cherished belongings, knowing they would bring joy to others. This act symbolized her trust in life's unfolding and her willingness to release attachments. Through embracing change, Evelyn found a renewed sense of grace and strength. She faced each new day with curiosity rather than fear, knowing that letting go was not an end but a transformation. Her journey inspired those around her to welcome change as a natural and meaningful part of life. Evelyn's story became a testament to the courage it takes to release and the liberation that follows. She closed her journal one evening with these words, "Letting go is the heart's way of making room for what's to come." With open hands and an open heart, Evelyn embraced the ever-changing flow of life, ready for whatever lay ahead. Her journal became a testament to this belief, filled with reflections, hopes, and affirmations. One evening, surrounded by family and friends, Evelyn spoke about her journey, the joys, the challenges, and the lessons. Her words resonated deeply, inspiring others to live fully and love openly. Evelyn knew her time was finite but felt peace knowing she had lived authentically. She closed her journal with a final entry, "A life well lived is a gift to the world. May my story remind others to embrace each moment with courage and love." With a heart full of gratitude, Evelyn faced each new day as a celebration of the past, present, and future, a legacy of resilience, joy, and unwavering hope. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? At 94, Evelyn reflected on the tapestry of her life with a mixture of gratitude, pride, and humility. The years had woven together moments of joy and sorrow, triumph and loss, growth and challenge. She recognized that her story was not defined by a single event but by the accumulation of choices, relationships, and lessons learned along the way. As she looked back, Evelyn saw how far she had come, from a young woman facing uncertainty to a wise elder embracing each day with purpose. The lessons she carried were not just her own but gifts she hoped to pass forward. Through her writing, storytelling, and conversations, Evelyn shared insights on resilience, love, courage, and the power of connection. She wanted others to know that aging could be a journey of discovery and strength rather than decline and isolation. Evelyn's mornings continued to be a sacred time for reflection and intention setting. She expressed gratitude for health, family, friends, and the opportunities to keep learning and giving. These practices fueled her spirit and reminded her that life's value was measured not in years but in the depth of experience and kindness. Grace remained a constant source of joy and support, their bond deepening as they navigated life's later chapters together. Evelyn found great comfort in mentoring Grace, watching her grow into a compassionate, confident woman. Their shared moments, simple conversations, laughter, and quiet companionship, were treasures that enriched Evelyn's days. Evelyn's storytelling group thrived as a community of voices, each member contributing wisdom and hope. Through their collective stories, they created a legacy of shared humanity and encouragement. Evelyn felt honored to be part of this circle, seeing how stories could heal and connect across generations. Facing mortality with grace, Evelyn embraced the unknown with faith and acceptance. She believed that a life well lived was one filled with love, courage, and the willingness to grow. She often said, "Our stories don't end, they live on in the hearts of those we touch."